Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Velero Community Meeting / Open Discussion. Today is October 27th, 2020, and we're going to start up with some status updates. First up, we have Carlisia.
Yes, so hello everybody. Last week we had a few days of Support-a-thon. We all worked on that, and it was basically we triaged and categorized and investigated. Well, we triaged and categorized all the support issues that were uh, open and investigated some, and we getting a much better process to handle that. I'm talking about support issues. And so that happened. On Friday, I started looking into an internal tool. Well, I started looking for like the fastest way to bring up a AWS cluster, an EC2 cluster, and got a bunch of options. Then I found out we have an internal tool. It's basically a Jenkins job that triggers this tool, and the tool uses TKG to put up a cluster. And I just finished. I mean, I ran it a bunch of times, ran into all kinds of issues, kept debugging it, wrote out the documentation. So I'll sync up with the internal team later if anybody wants to use this. So it's pretty cool. You just press a button pretty much, and 40 minutes later, boom, you have a cluster. I love it. I know there are a lot of options that does exactly this, but this I don't have to type anything. I just literally press a button. It's beautiful and it works. And a part of that is this neat tool, but very dangerous. Warning, warning. If people don't know, you can use this if you have a EC2 cluster, you can use this to decommission your stuff or delete anything, not for production. Um, so you've been warned. But this is really neat. To just run a command and everything gets decommissioned when you need to do that. Jonas, you're laughing.
Yeah, I would misuse this. Absolutely.
Well, I don't have any production stuff for my EC2 clusters, so I don't have to worry about it. But if I did, I don't even know if I will have the courage.
Yeah, same.
Have it on your laptop even.
Sorry?
To have the courage to even have it on your laptop.
Exactly. I wouldn't even install it. So I almost didn't put this on the doc, but it's very useful if you use it responsibly. And so PR reviews and Helm stuff are on my future. That's it.
All right, awesome. Any questions, comments for Carlisia?
So for folks wondering what that internal tooling is it's basically a Jenkins job that runs cluster API, which provisions the infrastructure and your
It's not.
cluster as well.
It's not.
It's not?
No.
Okay.
It's a tool written in Python that some people did. It's called CoreG, but it's internal, and that runs TKG.
TKG does cluster API, right?
Right, but it's not a straight cluster API.
Okay.
It's more like it runs TKG. It's the
Right. Any other questions, comments for Carlisia? Do you have any blockers this week? Anything you
no,
need help with?
no.
All right, good. Then next up we have Ashish.
Yeah, for me, like Carlisia was saying, Support-a-thon last week. I was away from work for a couple of weeks and came back. We had the Support-a-thon, and now I'm on community support this week. So I am kind of trying to make more progress on our support-a-thon progress that we already made, and also address any new incoming stuff. So I don't have much updates on that. I'm not sure if people here know, we have been having our office hours. We have had a couple of office hours. I think this week was our third, or last week was our third office hours, where we just try to like do office hours stuff, where like help you with your Velero questions and give demos and stuff. So if you're interested or you want to sign up to present, hit us up. We will see how to have that coordinated. That's all. Looks like I got my markdown wrong, so I'm going to fix that later.
Yeah, for the Velero office hours, we have that on the schedule for the distribution list, I believe. And yeah, we'll make some more noise. We wanted to try it out, see how it worked out. It's been working out pretty well. We've had a few people join in and ask questions and so on. So yeah, please join us when we have these. We'll make some more noise in the Slack channels as well, so people know that they're happening during those days. Any questions, comments for Ashish? All right. Any blockers for you, Ashish? Anything you need help with this week?
No.
All right. Moving on to Dave.
Hey, yeah, so Support-a-thon last week. That was interesting and exciting. I'm continuing to work on the end-to-end testing. So I've got like a basic test in Ginkgo that creates some data, creates a namespace, backs it up, and restores it, and working on getting it to verify. We have a small open source tool for generating and verifying data that's a synthetic test. Going to be, we've got approval to open source that, so I'm going to be pushing that out as an open source project, hopefully this week. And that's something we can use both with Velero, but pretty much anything where you want to create data and verify it, and ideally the verification process tells you what went wrong rather than simply exploding like it does with a lot of regular applications. Yeah, and so then we'll probably be looking for some input on testing and so forth, and also working on architecture stuff as we go along this week.
All right. Any questions, comments for Dave? Do you have any blockers? Anything specific you would need help with this week?
No, I'm doing good. Thanks.
All right. Last up, we have Nolan.
Yeah, so was also participating in the Support-a-thon last week. We're revisiting our bug triage process. We're going to get into a more regular cadence with reviewing the bugs, and Support-a-thon was part of an effort to kind of get to a more level, setting a new baseline for starting that. So we're beginning that this week. Also, last week released version 1, v1.4.3 and v1.5.2. Both included a security fix for properly binding restored persistent volumes and persistent volume claims. There was a race condition on busy clusters where the PV would get restored first, and if there was a persistent volume claim that the PV satisfied, it could get claimed by something else. Both 1.4.3 and 1.5.2 fixed that, and they both have some other fixes in them as well. And then just a reminder for the maintainers, there's several design PRs out there that could use additional comments. I need to get in on a couple of those as well.
Do you want to go through these PRs that you would like some help with?
Yeah, I know Scott's been waiting for a while on the restore item action for additional items to be ready to 867. I need to get on. I need to look at the top two, the timeout for plugins and the restore progress reporting. I know. I think Dylan asked about 3016 if it could get included in version 1.6. The short answer to that is yes, if we get the design doc approved and others can implement it, but I don't think we'll be implementing those. The only one of these that we plan to carry ourselves is 2403.
All right. Any questions, comments there? All right. You already talked about your blockers. So let's dive into the discussion topics. Rafael, Frankie, and Genting.
Hello, everyone. This is Rafael. Mind if I share my screen very quickly?
Please do.
Right. All right. This is the ticket. So just gonna talk a little bit. Hope it's not gonna take long. What we are trying to accomplish here. So the motivation for this PR, this design, is about migration, about clusters. If you take a backup, you from a given cluster, a given version of Kubernetes, and then after 2-3 years, if you want to restore the backup, you'll be able to. So that's skipping level versions of Kubernetes, or migrating workloads on different clusters using different distros, whatever. And the DNA for the change basically boils down to support different versions of API groups. I'm gonna explain very quickly what API groups, and I put those links on the doc at the same link inside of the ticket. And basically this is gonna help as well have Velero to support different CRDs out there, right? So every time we create this a CRD or even a native kind in Kubernetes, it's name a kind that belongs to a resource list that belongs to an API group. And API groups have different versions. Okay, so time goes by, Kubernetes got new versions, API groups evolve. Today, we have Velero to the ability to take a backup of those kinds in different versions. And if you go here on our output, on our documentation, how we take the backup and the format, if you pass a specific parameter, you can take multiple, you're gonna get multiple versions of the kind, right? That's today. And this is an example about one of my favorite API groups, outscaling. If you don't do anything, what you're gonna get is the preferred version. And that goes to a concept in Kubernetes that the API groups have multiple versions, but only one preferred version, which is where that kind is gonna be stored. If you don't do anything, you're always gonna get the preferred version. But with this parameter, you can at least take backups of all the versions that given cluster support. I'm gonna hand over to Frankie how we are proposing to tackle this problem. We coded as part of Velero how to take the backup, which is half of the conversation. The remaining half of this conversation is during the restore, how we're gonna pick those versions to be restored. remember there's two key concepts. Each cluster has the preferred, each cluster has a preferred version for each API group and an array of the versions that cluster support for that API group. So there is one version for preferred and an array for what actually supports. In this case here that you see on the screen, the V1 is preferred version. And when we take a backup, we put the word preferred version, which matches today with the classic for directory structure, which is namespaces. If you notice now we have a separate layer of directories, and each version that cluster supports for that particular API group is here. Before I hand over to Frankie, any questions, any comments about API groups? I know that's a complicated subject. Right. Frankie, you wanna?
Yep, I can take over now. I'll go ahead and share my screen. All right, so sorry about so much going on my screen. Where should I start? Oh yeah, so just to reiterate what Rafael was saying, in the past, and actually if you don't enable the API group versions feature flag, the only backups you'll get are the preferred version backups. So I have the HPA auto scaling backup here that I have done without the feature flag enabled, the API groups feature flag. And it only gives me the preferred version. But if with it enabled, you can see that I have multiple versions. I have preferred V2, which is the V1, V2 beta 1, and V2 beta 2. So this is now with the feature flag enabled in the backup. That was accomplished using this PR, by fulfilling this issue, closing this issue 2373. The next part now is restoring one of these. Normally, oh, and that issue is 2551. Normally, we would always have a preferred version from the source and then just back it up, and it would be the preferred version in the target. However, that's not always the case. And if you skip a Kubernetes version, it's possible that this V1, which was the preferred version in the source, is not supported at all in a target version. And that is when we would have to resort to using a different version. But how do we prioritize which version to use in case multiple versions are supported? And this is where my priorities slides will come in handy. I'll first describe it, and then I have more concrete examples in the following slides. So actually, before I describe the 3 priorities, I used to have 4 priorities that I put in. You can read about it in the issue itself. But the 4th priority is a bit difficult, and that is the case where there are no matching versions. We decided that for this issue, we will not do a priority 4. We will just do 3 priorities, which I'll go over, and then error out as normal if we can't find any common versions between the 2 clusters. So before I get into the priorities, is everyone clear about what Rafael and I are talking about, or are there any questions? All right. In that case, I'll go on to the 3 priorities we selected. The first priority is what happens normally, and that is that our target preferred version is our source preferred version, or our target preferred version is our source supported version. That means we can use, priority 1 is that the target preferred version can be used. Priority 2 is if the target preferred version cannot be used, then the source preferred version can be used. That is priority 2. And priority 3 means we're going to choose a common supported version between the target and the source clusters. And we will choose the latest version if there's more than one. All right, so let's go into the concrete examples. For the highest priority case, priority 1, we have we prefer the target preferred version, which is the target cluster's preferred API group version. Here it's V1. We will look for the in the source cluster this version, and we see that here it was V1 is the preferred version of the source cluster as well. So we'll go ahead and back up the V1. Sorry, I should actually maybe maximize this. Then continuing priority 1, just a slight variation. Case B, let's say that the source, we still prefer the target preferred version, but let's say we couldn't find it in the source as the source preferred version. Then we'll go ahead and look at the source cluster's supported versions, and we find here that it is in the list of supported versions. So we'll go ahead and choose V2 as the backup. All right, we'll go on to priority 2, which is prioritizing the source preferred version. This is where this happens when we can't, when say V2 in this case, the target cluster preferred version is found to be unsupported by the source cluster. So then we go to priority 2, which is the source cluster preferred version, and then we look for that version in the target cluster. And we find that indeed it is a supported version in the target cluster. So we'll go ahead and choose V1 in this example. And finally, let's say neither preferred version is supported by the other cluster. In that case, we go to priority 3. And so we see here that we have two matching, we have two API group versions that are in common between the source and target cluster. In that case, between V2 beta 1 and V2 alpha 1, we will choose V2 beta 1 because it is the latest. And that's what we will choose to back up. And that is how we're thinking about fulfilling this issue 2551. And that's all I have.
Does it make sense, everyone? There's a couple things that
So I have a quick question. So in all of this, will the user have any control over what version gets chosen? Or are we making decisions for the user?
I cannot hear Raphael, sorry. And you might have to repeat that question.
Oh, sorry. My question was, in all of these priority choosing, will the user have any control over the version of the CRD that gets restored? Or are the decisions made by priorities?
As far as I know, and Raphael, once we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, sorry about that. My reports just died.
Raphael, were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, like if the user there's any input, we can definitely put some in this design, an option to have user input, but we have to remember that those versions is per resource list, which can be, you know, depending on the backup. If it's a cluster level backup, can be like even hundreds, right? But we have to be smart how we're gonna have this a user input to cherry pick for a given CRD, right? But definitely we can make a priority 0, almost like a plugin where the user first do this matching based to a type, a resource list type. Does it make sense?
Yeah. So I'm thinking about the scenario where the you're choosing based on version numbers, but there may be some breaking changes in the CRD itself, which makes it impossible to restore, at which point the user may want to take control of the wheel and say, no, this is exactly the version that I want, and I'm going to handle the migration to a newer version myself. So we want to give the users that control. And the other thing that I was like, I think we can use, as I was hearing, I felt like we could, this is where like a dry run option for restore would be super useful.
It would be useful, but to interject here, I think that's like I'm not discounting the use of that. I think it's just more complicated than what would fit in this design.
Yep. I'm not saying maybe make it part of this design, but we might want to see if we can get that in for 1.7 maybe.
Okay. So one thing that we are working towards is actually creating a CRD, testing CRD with the webhooks, because all this translation between supported version, preferred version, it happens by magic by the webhooks, right? So we create a CRD, but then we realize that, oh no, not only creating a CRDs, but we have to code a controller that has a webhook to make those conversions. So that's what I'm working on. Once we have this prototype, we can use for unit testing and even do a demo or even increase the use cases that we have. But this is more heads up to everyone. Then we definitely probably gonna require more interactions with you all for this, because it's very, as you can see, the combinations kind of like the pain of the CRDs can be very vast, right?
Yeah, the next step for us is we'll be getting a design document up for the Velero team to review in the community as well. So we could get more feedback after that.
Okay. Any questions for us besides the ideas given? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, folks. Next up, we have Alay.
Hey guys. This is I'm Alay. I'm with Dylan and folks. We've been using Velero for migration use case, and just wanted to have some sort of discussion around what would be the best programmatic way for us to get the errors on partial failures. It seems that the Velero CRs currently just report the backup and restore CR just report the number of errors and don't actually report errors themselves. So just wanted to bring this up for discussion and understand the thought process of was there any work done to actually report the errors on the CR itself? Was that idea rejected? Stuff like that.
So actually, errors used to go directly on the CRs. And what we found was that actually overflowed the space on etcd for a given object. Usually Kubernetes objects get about 1.5 megabytes of space on etcd. So we were not able to put all the errors on a CR. because you put that full log there for a big cluster with a lot of resources, then that won't fit. But this is a great point because the only place they're in right now is in the log, and you basically have to download and parse the log. You can enable JSON logging to make it a little bit easier to parse in machine format, but right now that's kind of it's like a universal switch. So it's either all JSON for yourself, for the user and any consuming programs, or it's in a more human friendly format.
The other challenge
That makes sense. And yeah,
I was just going to say, related to that, the parsing the logs, one thing I've run into is the inconsistency currently between backup and restore also adds to the challenge there if you're actually looking at the results of, say, Velero get logs, because for backups, Velero logs includes the errors, but describe does not. And for restores, describe includes the errors, but logs does not.
Yeah. So one of the things that we were discussing, and I think Scott raised this, is we know that Velero describe does help in some sort of error, in some sort of parsing. Would it be possible to have that as an exported function? So maybe we could reuse that, and we can make a programmatic use of that in our code base. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. And second thing was that upstream, I know that there are issues regarding making sub resources on CR, custom resource, possible. So would you think that this is one of the use case for a sub resource like logs? So let's say Velero backup and restore have sub resource logs, which can be implemented with custom logic that would parse the logs and not have us dump in the CR or maintain a custom utility just for parsing those. So, yeah.
So the function, so the way the numbers are added to a custom resource for like restore or the backup is it's not actually parsing the log, it's just taking a length of the log messages. So it's not parsing as they come through. So there's no function for parsing to export right now. We just say we have a construct, I forget what it's called. We have a construct that carries the warnings and the errors, and we basically just like return a go len function and say how long was the errors slice, how long was the warning slice, and then throw that on the custom resource. So we don't actually parse it right now.
Although the Velero describe parses something, because I think that's what he was referring to, is that when you do a Velero describe restore, you get a list of errors, sorted by namespace and all that.
Okay. Oh yeah. Yeah, and that goes into that structure. I don't remember how that works off the top of my head. We'd have to dig into it. If there is a parsing function, I don't see why that couldn't be exported.
Although Alay, I think you don't, even with a sub resource, you may run into the same STD problem. So it may be that this may still need to be an on-demand kind of thing. But I guess part of the thing is we'd like to be able to pull it from our migration application, because one of the things is that our migration application kind of talks to multiple clusters, and our user interface talks to that cluster. So we wouldn't want the UI to have to go to the Velero, on whatever cluster. So that's why, even if we were going to do on demand, because we couldn't put it in the resource, we'd want to be able to call something on Velero API to pull it into our application and then return it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to just spend a couple minutes to share what I understand of custom sub resource. So I think what would happen with the custom sub resource is that we would not hit the same etcd cap there, because the way folks are talking about custom sub resources is that you would have your own implementation of that resource via a webhook. So essentially what we could do is we could imagine what Velero described does in order to parse the logs. We'd have the exact same functionality as a webhook and exposed via log sub resource. So this would become a native cube way of doing things. So I know this is a lot of work, and this involves support upstream as well. So I just wanted to point out that could this be a valid use case for that kind of implementation? If so, we can probably link out the issues and participate in that discussion as well.
So Sean says in the chat, it would be a virtual resource ? And I think that's right, because we would still want a representation of the logs in the object storage. We wouldn't want them to be pure custom resources. And I don't know enough about sub resources to know if it's a good use of it yet. I thought sub resources were limited to status and something else, but if you can make custom ones, that may be an option. And you aren't the only ones that would like to use this. Like, I think we've had folks at Dell say, hey, I want to know why this thing failed so I can like remediate it, or is this a recoverable error, or is this something else? So I think it's worth thinking about, and I do think, depending on how sub resources could be implemented, we probably wouldn't want to do it one per log message, but like maybe some like X number of log messages go per entry.
I think it would be tied to a CR, right? So I'm not sure if it would be tied, like it would be a function of the number of log, but it would be a function of the CR. So you have a backup CR, it has a sub resource logs. All the logging related to that CR can be accessed via that sub resource.
Right. I'm just thinking if the sub resource is still a Kubernetes custom resource, it would still have the etcd limitation. Now, if it's not actually a cube resource, then it wouldn't. But if it goes into etcd, it would still be limited by that API limit.
My understanding was that sub resources would just be like an endpoint at the REST interface. So the data, like you would just get a request at a webhook level, and then you would parse that request based on how you parse the logging right now. I don't think this will all depend how it is implemented, and
okay.
I think more immediate short-term goal would be to understand if we can do things with the existing described functionality and maybe have a common programmatic way of exposing errors in the current thing itself. And long-term, we can have this discussion. I just wanted to bring it up. So we have all the context needed for this.
Got it. Yeah, so for the sub resource, you're basically just exposing a web endpoint that would execute an arbitrary webhook, not necessarily exposing a sub Kubernetes resource. It wouldn't necessarily be a sub custom resource. It would be just a custom endpoint.
Yes, but that endpoint would be supported by Kube API server. And then a Kube API server will have a way of executing the webhook that we write.
Right. Kube API server would basically be a proxy for us.
Yeah.
That's
what I'm understanding. Like this could just be like an endpoint for a webhook, like a placeholder for an endpoint for a webhook, and wouldn't store anything.
I think that's the distinction between group version kind and group version and resource. like the group version resource is an endpoint, whereas kind represents actual serializable data structure. So I imagine this queue, like the sub resource log, being a GVR, group version resource. So you would only have an endpoint, and then that endpoint can be redirected to the webhook custom implementation. This is just me spending a little bit time. So I would take all of this with a grain of salt, largely because it's uncertain how upstream will take the implementation. But yeah, that's my understanding up till now.
Gotcha. I'm not opposed at all to some programmatic way of getting like all errors for backup or all errors for restore. Like I think that would be super useful. I just don't know enough about the sub resource support to give a great answer at the moment.
Yeah. I think the main answer I was looking for, I already got out of this discussion as to why they are not part of the backup and restore resource itself. So that's super helpful. And going forward, I think we might come up with a way, programmatic way to expose this short term. You will know we'll have a design doc out and stuff like that going forward. So
cool.
We'll circle back onto this discussion.
Yeah, I remember when I first started with Arc, we were putting the logs on the custom resource, and we had on outside of test clusters, we started seeing some very strange failures because so you can tweak that 1.5 megabyte limit, but it's pretty standard, and hosted implementations like AKS, EKS, GKE, they don't give you access to tweak that. So 1.5 is pretty standard.
That makes sense. Thanks.
All right. Any other comments there? Okay. Let's dive in.
I have a quick comment. I was a little slow in unmuting myself. So should this discussion result in an issue to be open to like implement something like Velero errors or something?
I think yes, we can definitely go ahead and create the issue. I am not 100% sure on what would be the priority on taking up those issues from our end. So, but that should not stop us from creating the issue itself, right?
Yep.
I can take that as an action item if you want.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. So let's see. Does anyone have any other discussion topics that they would like to bring up on today's call before we dive into the community shoutouts? All right, let's do some shoutouts. Nolan.
Yeah. So first off, we've got Abby McCarthy here from VMware fixing some of our documentation up. So this fixes some of the Minio code examples. Thank you very much for fixing these up, Abby. Always appreciate documentation fixing and clarification. This next one, I don't know how to pronounce this name. Hariharan, excuse me, filed an issue and fixed the issue. So the Velero client will now report if you have a mismatch between your server and your client, which is super useful for catching drift. So thank you very much, Hariharan. Next, I think this is Piper Doherty. So there was some discussion about restoring some Istio resources with Velero on the latest version of Istio, and Istio mutating webhooks that actually break some assumptions on both sides. So Piper actually fixed some issues with our expectations on the Restic wait container being the first init container. So this now fixes it so the Restic wait container can be anywhere, and we'll wait for it. So thank you very much, Piper, for catching that and fixing it. And then I think the rest of these are Helm. So this one, Genting caught an issue that we've seen in Velero itself, where the CI would run against forks. And so he fixed that issue on the Helm chart. So CI doesn't run against your fork. It only runs applicable the jobs against the actual repo where they have a chance of succeeding based on permissions. So thanks for doing that, Genting.
I've seen this in a few other repositories that I've been using as well. So this is very helpful.
Yeah, it's a common trip up with GitHub Actions. I think their documentation is not super clear on this. And we had it for a while before we figured out what was going on. And then we've got, it looks like some syntax change from Raoul for cleaning up the IM annotation on our values. So thank you for cleaning that up. I think that's for AWS. And then finally from Machine 424, if I remember right, can you go to the files changed really quick? Oh yeah, so this was fixing the data type for the pod priority class name so that it didn't silently get dropped. So it wasn't the correct type initially. So thank you very much, Machine 424.
Awesome. And with that, thank you everyone for joining today. Hope you have a fantastic rest of the week, and see you all next week. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.